The Tallarn Desert Raiders are a series of extramilitarum regiments that are, as implied by their very name, recruited from the arid world of Tallarn. The Desert Raiders are noted for being well versed in the arts of guerrilla warfare, favoring the use of hit-and-run tactics to inflict as much damage upon the enemy as possible, and retreating back into the wilderness before they can retaliate. To aid in this, the Desert Raiders will often make frequent use of Sentinel and Rough Rider squadrons so as to continuously harry their opponents in order to keep them on the proverbial back foot. Despite favoring evasiveness and maneuverability upon the field of battle, the Desert Raiders will nonetheless make extensive use of mechanized units, such as APCs and tanks, with which to deliver a sudden and often fatal sledgehammer blow to their foes. In fact, the tank crews of the Desert Raiders are said to be amongst the very best of their kind within the entire Imperium, often putting the crews of other extramilitarum regiments to shame. While the Desert Raiders are said to embody the doctrines of stealth, swiftness, cunning, and how to best deliver the killing blow, there is one man who is said to personify such beliefs more than any other warrior from Tallarn, a man known simply as Al-Rahim. Al-Rahim is a captain and company commander within the Tallarn 3rd Regiment, a unit that is known more commonly as the Desert Tigers. Al-Rahim is known for being a highly charismatic and quick-witted individual, traits which, when combined with his bravery, natural confidence, and martial prowess, mark him out as a natural-born leader. Indeed, it is even said that Al-Rahim can convince the men under his command to follow him into the very mouth of hell itself, and is so well respected within the extramilitarum that even the soldiers of the Katakan jungle fighters, regiments who are notoriously distrustful and insubordinate towards outsiders, will follow his command without question. During the Battle of Esko's Moon, Al-Rahim would lead his men in a protracted guerrilla war against the Eldari, who themselves were making use of similar such tactics against Imperial forces, forcing the two sides into something of a stalemate. However, this stalemate would eventually be broken when Al-Rahim, along with a handful of Desert Raiders, would carefully and silently journey halfway across the Moon's equatorial continent before launching an assault from a lightly defended and supposedly impenetrable southern pass, catching the Zeniths in a devastating crossfire. During the subsequent battle, Al-Rahim would best the Eldari autarch Kaliel in combat and take his head as a trophy, causing the remaining Eldari to rout and flee from the battle. And yet, Al-Rahim would appear to not be the first captain of the Desert Tigers to bear the name, for there are a number of legends regarding another Captain Al-Rahim who fought centuries ago during the events of the Macharian Crusade. This particular iteration of Al-Rahim would lead his company in the compliance of Thoth, a desert world that had developed independently from the Imperium of Man. The transport carrying Al-Rahim's company would unexpectedly crash land within the deep desert, though thankfully for the Desert Tigers, they would be discovered and rescued by a local tribe known as the Nago. Being a natural linguist, Al-Rahim would quickly learn to communicate with the Nago, who were not only fascinated with Imperial culture, but informed the guardsmen that the other inhabitants of Thoth had fallen to chaotic corruption and were actively summoning demonic entities in order to combat against Imperial forces. Al-Rahim would then proceed to lead the Nago in a series of hit-and-run assaults against the forces of chaos, whittling the enemy down little by little during the ensuing conflict. While the Imperium would eventually claim victory over Thoth, the Inquisition would ultimately declare the world to be a mundi heretica, meaning that the world's population had been contaminated at a genetic level by the powers of chaos, and thus needed to be subjected to exterminatus. However, Al-Rahim would manage to convince the Inquisition to spare the Nago, reasoning that the Nago had fought valiantly against the servants of the ruinous powers, and thus deserved to be granted some form of amnesty. The Nago, along with various samples of flora and fauna, would then be evacuated from Thoth before the world was subjected to a viral bombardment. Sometime later, after the virus had long since run its course, the Nago would be returned to Thoth after swearing oaths of fealty to the Emperor of Mankind. The descendants of Al-Rahim himself would go on to rule over Thoth in the Emperor's name, and would in time become known within official records as the Lords Al-Rahim, in honor of the man who led the Nago to victory against the enemies of man so long ago. Because the Macharian Crusade and the Battle of Esco's Moon are heavily implied, if not outright confirmed to have taken place hundreds of years apart from one another, this raises an important question. Are these two Al-Rahim separate and distinct individuals, or could they in fact be the exact same person? Initially, it would appear to be somewhat unlikely for these two Al-Rahims to be the same person due to the fact that they supposedly lived centuries apart from one another. Despite this, there do exist a number of surgical procedures within the Imperium, such as rejuvenate treatments, genetic or cybernetic augmentations, that allow an individual to extend their natural lifespan by several decades, centuries, or in some extreme cases, even millennia. While such treatments will often be reserved for high-ranking officials or members of the aristocracy, it's not entirely outside the realm of possibility for a famed and highly respected Imperial Guard commander to also undergo the rejuvenative process and thus allow them to continue serving the Emperor for centuries to come. What further supports the idea that these two Al-Rahims are indeed the same person is that both men are known to wield seemingly identical weapons in battle, specifically that of a plasma pistol and power sword. While the utilization of such weaponry could arguably be seen as being nothing more than a coincidence, as many other Astra Militarum officers are known to be armed in a similar manner, it is in fact the power sword wielded by both Al-Rahims that would appear to strengthen the apparent connection between the two. This is due to the fact that the sword possessed by both men is a highly ornate, mastercrafted power sword known as the Claw of the Desert Tigers, which is engraved with various emblems of the desert that give the weapon a distinctive and unique appearance. There is also the fact that both Al-Rahims are captains and company commanders within the exact same regiment, which, as mentioned earlier, is that of the Tallarn 3rd. Despite this, it should be noted that the types of plasma pistol utilized by both men do in fact appear to be slightly different, as the plasma pistol of the Al-Rahim who fought the Battle of Thoth is shown to incorporate an inbuilt targeter, whereas the plasma pistol of the later Al-Rahim does not. That being said, however, given how plasma weapons demonstrate the propensity to overheat and explode without warning, it is completely possible that Al-Rahim's original pistol may have been destroyed at some indeterminate point in time, forcing him to requisition a replacement from the Departamento Munitorum. There is even a possibility that the two Al-Rahims are indeed the same person due to the time-distorting effects of warp space. This particular notion is even alluded to within the 5th edition Imperial Guard Codex, suggesting that Al-Rahim's ship could theoretically have made a warp jump some time after the events of the Macharian Crusade, only for it to rematerialize back into real space hundreds of years later. Indeed, it is worth remembering that within the depths of warp space, time is capable of moving forwards, backwards, standing still and bending all at the same time, meaning that while only a few minutes may have passed within the warp, days, centuries, or even millennia may have passed within the material realm. As well as this, both incarnations of Al-Rahim are documented as being incredibly gifted linguists, further supporting a potential connection between the two. While there are a number of admittedly strong connections between the two Al-Rahims, there still exists a possibility that these two men are in fact entirely separate individuals. Instead of being the same man who fought during the course of the Macharian Crusade, it's possible that the modern-day iteration of Al-Rahim is in actuality his descendant, one who was either named in honor of his ancestor or chose to take on the moniker himself out of respect. This could explain as to how this version of Al-Rahim was able to acquire the Claw of the Desert Tigers, as such a weapon could have been something akin to a family heirloom, which would be passed down over the course of several generations. After all, according to the 2nd edition Imperial Guard Codex, Al-Rahim was indeed confirmed to have fathered children, for his descendants, as mentioned earlier, would go on to become the rulers of the world of Thoth. However, if this were indeed the case, then it would certainly be incredible coincidence for a descendant of Al-Rahim to assume command of the exact same regiment that he did. What makes this particular instance seem somewhat unlikely, however, at least initially, is that according to the 8th edition Astra Militarum Codex, regiments will rarely, if ever, receive any new recruits from their homeworld to replenish the losses that they inevitably sustain in battle. Instead, out of simple practicality more than anything else, any formations that fall under strength will simply be matched together into one in order to bring it up to combat readiness. But then again, perhaps the modern-day Al-Rahim was not originally a part of the Tallarn Third, and was instead an officer within an entirely different unit, which would go on to become integrated into the Desert Tigers after sustaining heavy casualties during a particularly brutal campaign. The only major exception in regards to inducting additional troops into the ranks of the pre-existing Astra Militarum regiment is seen with those recruits known as White Shields, individuals who were fathered by active members of an Astra Militarum garrison. If the Tallarn Third were at any point acting as a garrison force, then any children sired by members of the regiment could have been drafted into the ranks of the Desert Tigers once they came of age, making it entirely possible for one of Al-Rahim's bastards to eventually ascend through the ranks and inherit the titles and responsibilities of their father. Alternatively, perhaps the modern incarnation of Al-Rahim has no blood ties whatsoever to the original and was simply named either in honor of a great hero or through simple coincidence. Or maybe the name of Al-Rahim has instead become something more akin to that of a title, with each successive captain of the Tallarn Third adopting the name upon being promoted to captain, with the claw of the Desert Tigers coming to serve simply as a symbol of office. After all, the name of Al-Rahim is one that has garnered much respect and admiration throughout the entirety of the Astra Militarum, and would undoubtedly be a title that any officer of the Tallarn Desert Raiders would be proud to hold. Such an idea is not without precedent, for as mentioned earlier, the rulers of Thoth would themselves use the name Al-Rahim as a title, with each successive ruler of the world being known by the title of Lord Al-Rahim. Whatever the truth may be, few can deny the fact that Al-Rahim is without question one of the greatest men to have ever emerged from the deserts of Tallarn, one whose legacy is both revered and respected even to this day. What do you think? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.